Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I'm Miss Lisa, and this is my YouTube channel where I talk about things that I want to, that are science and math. This is biology, and we're today going to talk about human genetics. If you're doing this as the homeschool class, it's chapter 27 in your book. And if you're not, that's all right. We're just going to talk about human genetics, and you are welcome to join us. So if you have not seen the previous videos, you should go back and watch the one on mitosis and meiosis, and then you should watch the one that we did last time on inherited traits, because we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about human genetics. A lot of what's in this chapter is also in the other chapter, though, because I sort of jumped ahead because it's interesting. I can't help myself sometimes. All right, so you will notice that people who live in the same family tend to look alike. And you might look a little like your brothers and sisters, or maybe not so much. But people who are in the same family do tend to look more alike. I remember one time I was at my grandmother's house, and all the family was there. I don't remember why. Seems like maybe it was Easter or something, or maybe after my grandfather died, I don't know, but everybody there was family. And looking around at those eyes, everybody had these big blue eyes. Again, it was because my grandmother and grandfather had big blue eyes, and those kids had big blue eyes, and there were just all these same eyes of, there were 30 people there that looked, and it hit me. Boy, they look a lot alike. And one time when I was teaching, I'm teaching public school now. But when I used to teach public school before, a long time ago, I was at a different school. I was at some science teacher convention, and I saw this guy who was there. He was a fellow teacher, and I thought, boy, do you look like my family. He maybe didn't look exactly like me, but he looked like all these people who were my grandparents' generation on my grandmother's side of the family. And I was like, man, you look like a relative. So I went over and talked to him, and his last name was the last name of my grandmother's family, Haygood. And I was like, oh, we're related. And we sat there and talked a minute. Yep, we were related. He was a Haygood, and he was related to my grandma and my grandmother and Granny. And I saw him across the room and thought, you look like my family. And he was. So we have inherited characteristics. How we get those inherited characteristics, and his were Haygood characteristics, is through genetics. So part of your cells are your chromosomes, and you have body cells, which are your just regular cells, and then sex cells, which are eggs and sperm. Body cells have a full set of chromosomes, so they're called diploid. Sex cells have half the chromosomes, so they're haploid. And the reason why is because humans only have a certain number, and other organisms have a certain number. And that is a characteristic of that organism. So ours is 46. Sex cells have 23. You get 23 from your mom, 23 from your dad, so that you get the right number, 46. All of them, they're the same from your mom and your dad. So like you got a hair color gene from your dad and a hair color gene from your mom. And then what is expressed is what we're going to talk about. And what we talked about last time, because we talked about that if it's Mendelian genetics, then what will be expressed is whatever is dominant. So we talked about brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes. So if your dad had brown eyes and your mom has blue eyes, then if your dad has all of his genes say brown-eyed, then the children will have brown eyes. Now, the dad could be a carrier for the recessive gene for blue eyes, and then you could have blue eyes, and that's what happened to me. My dad had brown eyes, but me and all my siblings have blue eyes because dad carried the brown-eyed gene, which was expressed in him as brown eyes, but he also had the recessive gene for blue eyes, which he passed on to his kids. Now, normally, that would have been half and half. Half the kids would have brown and half blue, but it's not like it works like that. It's like flipping a coin. And when you flip a coin, it's 50% likely for heads and 50% likely for tails. Or like a ratio, it would be 1 to 1. But you know, you could flip heads 10 times in a row. There's nothing stopping that. And that was the same thing with our eye color. It was 50-50 if we were going to have blue or brown, but we all have blue. And if there had been a fourth kid, then they could have blue too, or we could have all had brown. But the likelihood, but if you have a big enough sample size, not just 3 kids, but say it's a different kind of organism that has 100 kids, then you will start to see that ratio play out, where actually the offspring would be 50-50, or whatever percentage that is predicted by the Punnett square. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and watch the last video. All right, so the chromosome numbers are different with different organisms. Like a red clover plant has 12, where we have 46. A pea has 14. A cat has 38. A rabbit has a set of 44. It's interesting that cats have less pairs than rabbits. Chickens have 78. So chickens have way more than us, and that's weird too. So now how can they tell what the chromosomes are going to be for a person or whatever? For a person, they'll do like a blood sample. Well, they'll do a tissue sample where they can get your chromosomes. They harvest them. Remember how I told you that they can like become all stringy like spaghetti, but before the cells divide, they coil up and they look like little X's. They'll get them when they look like X's, and then they can look at them and look at their chromosomes and see if there's problems in them. And with unborn babies, what they will do is they'll put a big needle through the mom's stomach and through the amniotic sac, and they get out amniotic fluid, because in the amniotic fluid are baby cells, and then they can look at those chromosomes and see if the baby's okay or not. They offered that to me with my youngest, Joshua, was a baby, because I guess I was a little older as a mom when I had him, but the reason why they offered it is because I was older. They thought that maybe he could have Down syndrome or some genetic abnormality. When you do amniocentesis, this sticking the needle in, it can cause a spontaneous abortion, which means it's like you're in a water balloon and the water balloon pops and the baby comes out and dies. So I asked them, if he had something wrong, was there anything they could do other than offer an abortion? If abortion is not an option, and we were going to keep Joshua no matter what, no matter if he had Down syndrome or whatever, we wanted him. We were glad to have him. Perfect or not, we wanted him. And I said, abortion is not an option. Is there, should I have this done? And they said no, because you could have a spontaneous abortion. It could actually kill the baby by making it come out too soon. So I didn't have it done, and he was born and he was okay, kind of okay. He did have one little genetic thing, which they wouldn't have recommended abortion anyway for that. But when he was like 10 months old, they went in to take out his tonsils and adenoids, because he had a lot of problems with that. And so they told me before the surgery that was going to last about 45 minutes or 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 20 minutes, not very long. Well, they had him back there on the operating table 4 hours. And I'm like, what in the world? And I thought, well, if he's dead, they'll come tell me. So I'm just going to try not to worry that this surgery. And I thought maybe they delayed him. Maybe he didn't really go back. Maybe he's not really been being operated on for 4 hours, because why in the world would they be operating on him for 4 hours? Well, the doctor came out and they had been operating on him for 4 hours. When they went in to take his tonsils and adenoids, they noticed, that little thing that hangs in the back of your throat, the uvula, instead of having one, he had two. He had 2 uvula. And instead of being regular size, they were 2 little ones. I had never noticed it. I felt like he was being the 3rd kid. I just didn't look at him that good. I feel like maybe if he had been the first one, I would have noticed. But the doctor said, well, he didn't notice it either, I guess, but I think it was maybe that his tonsils were so enlarged they were blocking it. But anyway, it was a stage 1 cleft palate. You know how people can have like cleft lips where their lips are split? You can also have the top of your mouth split. Well, he had cleft palate and we had never realized it. So in all those papers you sign before an operation, there's a stack of them that says, I give the doctor permission to do with whatever he wants. And yes, I understand that there's always a risk of death in any surgery. That's what those papers say. And of course you sign them. So I signed them. Well, one of those papers said that if he found something wrong, he could fix it. So he went ahead and did the cleft palate reconstruction surgery, which is a 4-hour surgery we found out while he was in there. And so like the day I found out that Joshua had a cleft palate was the day I found out that the doctor had fixed it. But that is a genetic trait. And even though no one in my family had it, we are missing teeth. I have teeth that just never formed, and other people in my family have that. And later I learned that it's the same gene that carries missing teeth as cleft lip, cleft palate. So anyway, Joshua did have a genetic problem, but not one. But anyway, so that's why they do the amniocentesis, to look at the genes to see if there's something so wrong with your baby that you would want to abort it. But I didn't care what was wrong with him. I wanted him. And also, we had been infertile, so we were just so happy to have a third baby. But anyway, we're always happy with babies. But they wanted to do amniocentesis. I said no. But another teacher at my school at that time was the same age, and she had the amniocentesis, and her baby was okay. It didn't cause a spontaneous abortion. And he was fine too. So his name was Wade, cute little baby Wade. But anyway, now one of the characteristics that you get from your chromosomes is your sex. If you're a girl, your sex chromosomes are XX, meaning you got an X from your mom and an X from your dad. If you're a boy, you got a Y from your dad and an X from your mom. So every boy is a YX, every girl is an XX. And when the sperm is formed, remember how we learned how the sex cells divide to be 4, and all 4 sperm are in the mix for making babies. So with that division, half of the sperm is male and half of the sperm is female. I remember a long time ago hearing about a king who wanted a male heir, but his wives all kept having females, so he'd like get rid of one and get another one. And it turns out that males are the ones who could determine the sex of the baby. So it wasn't their fault, it was his fault. It was him. So he shouldn't have been getting rid of his wives. I think he was having them killed. So didn't want to be that guy's wife. He wasn't a good husband, was he? But anyway, the male is the one. Your dad is the one who made you, male or female. Okay, so the other chromosomes that are not sex chromosomes are called autosomes, and they're the ones that control everything else. So it's half and half whether you'll be male or female. So we have already talked about dominant and recessive traits in the last video and incomplete dominance. So if you didn't hear that, go back and listen to it before you read this one. And remember the other thing I told you, that the whole thing about meiosis is having the genetic material so that each sex cell only has half, so that the new organism has the right number, but also that it's shuffling the cards. The genes need to be shuffled up so we have more variety. And we talked about one way they do that is that one sex cell makes 4 eggs or sperm, and each one are different in how the cards were shuffled and which genes they get. And that's just through dividing and dividing in meiosis. But there are other ways that these decks are shuffled. Another thing they'll do is the genes will, like they're little X's, and sometimes the ends of them will switch some more. It's like after you shuffle the cards and they cut the deck and then you go, oh, I'm going to shuffle it a little more, and you're going to have to recut it again. There's extra layers of shuffling in this. So another thing that has to do with is your heritage. So remember a while ago, Senator Elizabeth Warren claimed Indian heritage, okay? And then she doesn't look very Indian, but she always thought that she was Native American. So eventually she took a DNA test and she was not Indian. Like, she didn't have hardly any at all. And so then they started calling her Pocahontas, like fake Pocahontas and stuff like that. So we're not getting into politics, just to let you know. So I have a friend who's all into genetics and family trees and stuff like that. So I was talking to her about it. And she said that just because you have something in your heritage, like maybe she really did have Indian in her heritage, Native American, that every time a new baby is born, the deck is shuffled and the cards are dealt. And you might not, there might be Indian cards in your family tree, but you might not get dealt any of them. So it could be that she did have a Native American ancestor, but she might not have gotten any of those Native American genes when the cards got shuffled and dealt. Because part of the point of meiosis is diversity, variety, and so the cards are shuffled. I saw some political commentators called the Hodge twins. They are identical twins who they call themselves black, and they're very light-skinned. And people say, you're not black, you're white. And they're like, no, both of our parents are black. People think that maybe one parent was black and one was white. They're like, no, both of our parents were black. Well, they had their like Ancestry.com thing done, and they actually, the cards they were dealt, because they did have Caucasian in their ancestry, they actually are over 50% Caucasian. They're like 55% Caucasian because of the cards they were dealt. They just happened to get, even though both parents were black, they had white in their ancestry, they just happened to get a bunch of white cards. So they're very, very light skinned, and people are like, you're not black. And they're like, yeah, we are. But anyway, so that's really interesting because I have Native American in my ancestry. And, you know, I wonder, so I wonder if, like, would I be like Pocahontas and it show up none? I don't know. But my dad had it in his ancestry. And a long time ago, we went on a homeschool field trip to the Chieftains Museum in Rome, Georgia. And there was a portrait of a chief who had lived in that house. And it took my dad had passed away not long before I went to that museum. So I turned the corner, walked in the room, and it took my breath away because it was a big painting of my dad with different lips. I was like, so my dad definitely got a lot of the Native American. He looked Native American. I don't think I do very much. My kids seem to think I do a little bit. They say, Mom, your nose, but oh no. But, and also some of my dad's cousins really look Native American. Like a lot of people would think they were Hispanic even because of how they looked, but it was Native American. But anyway, so because of that, because you can like be Native American but not get many of those genes that are considered the Native American genes, that whether or not they say that you could like be Native American, live on the reservation and stuff like that, they do not take genetic tests for that. Because they could be like the chief of the Cherokee, but have Caucasian in their, or whatever, non-Cherokee, you know, in their heritage, and they might come up not many cards, not much Native American there. So they only base it on family tree, that if you can prove that you were related to these people who are known people on the Indian registries, then that's how they determine whether or not you're Native American percentage or not. Not on genetics, because you might have got a shuffled cards where that doesn't really show up in your blood when they do like those blood tests. Or now that like you can do it with ancestry, you can do a saliva test. My sister had it done, and we found out that we have a lot of Scandinavian ancestry, which I didn't expect. And she did come back, Native American comes back Asian, and she did come back with Asian, but not a very high percent, where I would imagine that my dad would have come back with a much higher percent. My sister is very, very fair. I'm more dark, brown. I don't know if you could tell it on YouTube, but I'm brown. I'm not really, I don't I'm not tanned. I'm always this brown. Where my sister, she is white. She, like, we would go out in the sun, and I never get sunburned, and she would just blister, that really white skin, and she'd get fever blisters on her lips from the sun. So I kind of like being brown because it's more convenient. More convenient. I don't get sunburned like poor Gail does, my sister. Oh, I remember just feeling sorry for her. And and there's another thing. Okay, so my mom, sorry about that. My phone's messing up. My mom, is very fair. The Native American comes from my dad. My dad was real brown like me, and when I was young, one of my memories is I had turned real brown just because I'm brown. And I remember one time my mom was giving me a bath because I was little. I was like 5 or something. And she was trying to wash the brown off of me. She was like, I can't get you clean. What did you get into? And then eventually she figured out, oh, you're brown like your dad. But my sister, who's older than me, she's all fair. But my mom tried to wash my brown off. She wasn't racist, I promise, but she just didn't know about having a child who turned brown and then didn't get white again, just stayed brown. All right, anyway, so another thing that's characteristic by genetics is color blindness, and there's a little test in your book. If you're not following this book, you can go online, but there'll be like patterns of dots, and there'll be something hidden in the colors, and if you don't see it hidden, you have some color blindness. It doesn't mean you don't see any color, you just don't see color the way other people do in full spectrum. And with teaching science, I always have kids who, with different labs, we're looking at colors and they can't see it because I have colorblind kids. I had one this time and there were questions about colors and he was like, Miss Blackburn, this isn't fair. So, but anyway, and I would do this thing in chemistry where I'd have kids every year realize they were colorblind. Usually guys, colorblindness is more common for guys to have than girls. And every year I would have kids figure out with this one lab we do in chemistry, that they had some color blindness. And so I just always remember this one guy named Marcus, and he was so upset. And I'm like, Marcus, you've been this way your whole life. Why are you so upset to just find out about it? And he said, Miss Blackburn, before today, I thought I was perfect, and I'm not. I always remember Marcus thinking he was perfect. All right, so you can have errors in chromosome numbers. You can have genetic disorders. I told you I have one with my blood, but that I got through my mom, got that on my mom's side. But there can be other things. There are things like Tay-Sachs. Oh, and certain blood disorders are more likely for certain ethnic groups. So like Tay-Sachs is one that more Jewish people get. Sickle cell trait and sickle cell anemia is one that is more prevalent upon people of African heritage, African Americans. And like there was one my grandfather had that was more common with Mediterranean people. My grandfather was like, I didn't know that I had any Mediterranean in me. The blood disease I have is actually more common among Cajuns in Louisiana. And said the doctor who was talking to me is like, are you sure you're not part Cajun? I'm like, I don't know, I could be anything. But anyway, he was thinking could be part African American Cajun. Could be, don't know everything about my family history. Doesn't matter. I am what I am. Glad to be it. Glad to have any heritage I have. So anyway, there are genetic counselors that can help figure out genetic problems in families, and sometimes they'll make decisions on whether or not to have children or to adopt children because they sometimes don't want to continue a negative characteristic if it is something especially that's fatal, like the one with Joshua and me. Who cares? But there are some that can be fatal or really devastating, and so some people will decide if they have certain genetic characteristics that instead of having children that they'll adopt, and that's good too, right? All right, so that we will talk more about DNA, more about genetics next time. So come back and learn about DNA, life's code. Between time, like, share, subscribe. Science is great. I'll see you next time.